In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a hand railing for your staircase. Any staircase that is more than 3 steps, in other words, 1, 2, 3, 4 risers or more, usually requires a handrail by code. Now, we basically had that before the kitchen remodel, so I moved the pantry over here, and I had to kind of build this wall out a little bit. I'm not quite done yet, but what that did is it kind of cut the railing in half, and so we're definitely not to code now. And so now we're going to put a hand railing in on this side all the way up. One of the first things we're going to want to do is get our measurements and layout done for where the top of the new railing is going to be. We do have some guidelines for this. So from the edge of each stair tread, we are going to want to have approximately 34 to 38 inches in height. We also want to keep in mind where our studs are, and so we're going to go along and mark our studs. For that, we can use a stud finder here, and so all we really have to do with something like this, we'll turn it on, and then I have it set to 1/2 inch because it's 1/2 inch drywall here. Now I'm going to press this button on the side, and it's going to start calibrating it because I know that there's not a stud here. Now that it's calibrated, I'm going to slide over. Notice there's light switches here. Usually there's going to be a stud on either the left or the right side of a light switch. And so as we slide it over, we start to get our reading here, and then it marks the center of where your studs are. Now it's not perfect, but it definitely gives you a good idea of where it is, and we definitely want to know where those are so that we can get a sturdy connection to the wall with our brackets. Now for the brackets, usually we want at least one every 4 foot. And so we have these brackets like this. And so for an 8-foot railing, for example, you're going to want at least 3. So one at each end and then one in the middle. We're going to have about 3 here. We're not going to quite have 8 foot, but that will do. And our studs are not perfectly in the right place for where I would want them to be, but sometimes you just got to work with what you have. Now, if I was installing it from scratch, I would actually install some blocking, and a lot of people do this with new construction. Right where the railing is going to be, they'll have some nice blocking, so it doesn't really matter where you attach the bracket, and you're going to have, a really good connection to the wall. But I assume that a lot of you don't have that luxury. What I did next is made a vertically plumb line on the wall that represents the start and finish of the railing. And for that, I used a plumb bob or a level, and we lined it up with the edge of the first stair tread, and then we did the same thing up at the top. After that, we will measure vertically upward along that line, and then we get our height. And so once we get our height, somewhere between 34 and 38 inches, we can then draw our sloped line that matches the slope of the stairs, and that represents the top of the handrail. And so that illustrates what it's going to look like, and we can always erase those pencil marks afterwards. The other thing you could do with this line that's parallel to the slope of the staircase is use a chalk line. You could also move this line down, so instead of representing the top of the handrail, it actually represents where you're going to be attaching the brackets. As long as you are aware of what that line represents, you'll be fine. I'm just going to be measuring down from that line in order to attach my brackets in the proper position. Now I measure that diagonal line, and I get just over 6 feet because I need to cut my 8-foot handrail to length. I have this level in a plumb position, and I come down and I have the other level matching the slope of the staircase, and then I just use a little Sharpie to put two little marks there on that level. And you could do this with a scrap board or something like that, but that basically gives us the angle to set the saw to when we go to cut that railing. It's an easy way to do it. You can also use trigonometry, and you can figure out the rise and run, and then figure out the angle with inverse tangent of rise over run. Now I line up my miter saw with those two marks, and you should end up with an angle of approximately 37 degrees. I got a little bit closer to 40 degrees on mine. I'm actually going to set the bevel to that angle that I found so that it can sit nice and flat as it's being cut. The first cut is done here. I wouldn't worry too much about any burn marks. We can always sand it down. I'm going to be staining this, but you can also paint it as well. It just depends on what you want. You can see what that angle is going to do for you. It allows you especially to butt up to a vertically plumb railing post and connect nicely. But when you're free floating it like over here, that design is okay, but I think it's a little bit pointy, and so we're actually not going to go with that. We're actually just going to cut it at 90 degrees, and it'll look something like this with rounded edges after I sand it. The other common way to do it is to cut it at a 45 and then terminate it back into the wall with an additional piece. But that's not the design that we chose to go with. For the final design that we chose, I just need to cut this perpendicular with the saw set to 0 degrees on both bevels at approximately 80 inches. So now we place our handrail brackets on our stud locations below where the top of the handrail is going to be so that we can account for the thickness of the handrail. And for me, I have to extend a little bit beyond where the handrail would normally end, just because that's where my stud is. And so we'll get these brackets into position. You can use your scrap piece of railing section to help you get it positioned properly. So I marked those 3 screw holes with a Sharpie, and I can just take an eraser and erase all of my pencil marks. So we're drilling pilot holes with a 1/8 inch drill bit, like the directions to the brackets suggest. When you do this, you may find out whether or not you missed your stud. And so in this case, this pilot hole just went all the way through, and I could tell it was right on the edge, so I'm actually going to have to move my bracket over just slightly. And so this step is really important, that we make sure that we're hitting our stud. We could angle the screw slightly, but in this case I'm just going to move the bracket over just a little bit. So the first bracket is screwed on now. I'm just going to come through with just a little bit of joint compound and paint to just repair the fudged hole. The bracket at the bottom is screwed in and the bracket at the top is screwed in, and so that allows me to find the exact position of that middle bracket here. Now that all 3 of the brackets are attached securely with screws to the stud, I will then come along with the railing loosely fit in place and get it exactly where I want it, and then come up underneath and mark exactly where the screw holes are going to attach into the bottom of the railing. So as you can see, now that the railing's in the correct spot, I just marked the 2 holes. There's a groove here that represents the center line. That's where we want to screw. And so I'm going to pre-drill these as well, just a little bit smaller since they are smaller screws. The railing is now attached. What we have to do now is basically just peel off the stickers, and we are going to sand down the sharp edges here, and then we are going to stain it and put a coat of poly on it, and it is good to go. I'm using a plastic razor blade to get the sticker off. So now I'm going to take the orbital sander and just gently round over all of the sharp edges. So now the edges are rounded over there. I'm also going and finding any rough spots and sanding them down as well. Now I'm using some dark walnut stain along with just an old cut up undershirt and a glove to wipe the stain on the wood and get it to the point where it matches the other wood in the house. So the staining is coming along here. Just keep in mind that you want to work in small areas and you only want to let it soak in for a few minutes, and then you want to wipe any excess off. You do not want to let it dry, the excess that has not absorbed on the surface. So make sure you're wiping it clean. If you want it to be darker, you can apply another coat after a few hours. Just make sure you're following those directions. And then we want to let it dry for at least 12 hours before we apply our coat of polyurethane. Before I put the coat of polyurethane on it, what I'm doing is just wiping it down now after it was dry with a microfiber rag. And what that's going to do is just remove any of these dust particles. You can kind of see before and after that there's definitely little particles that can be embedded into the surface. We just want to get it as clean as we can before we seal it up with the poly. Now I'm going to be spraying on this fast drying polyurethane clear semi-gloss. And so for this, I'm basically following the directions on the back, making sure that the surface is clean. I'm at a good temperature. I shake this vigorously for a few minutes. We're going to hold it about 12 inches away and spray it on nice and evenly in thin coats. We're going to put at least 2 coats on, and we're going to wait less than 2 hours between each coat. If you have to wait more than that, then you might want to sand it in between. And then once you're done with that final coat, we are going to wait about 24 hours before actually using it. I'm switching to these more durable GRK fasteners, and so I just need to spray paint them black to match. The screws that came with it are a little bit shorter and less sturdy, and they're prone to having their heads snap off because this is hardwood, and as the screws go into the oak, it squeezes really hard, and it's just prone to having the heads twist off of these if you're not using the more durable ones. So I chose to do different screws, and that's fine. I'm just painting it to match. Okay, so we got the screws painted black, and we got the first coat of poly on here. You can see it start to shine a little bit more. All right, and there's the second coat. I put it on a little bit thicker than the first coat. The first coat's basically just a tack coat, and then the second coat you can start to go a little bit thicker. I did a third coat as well, mainly in the areas that are going to be touched by people's hands as they use the stair railing. Don't forget when you're done using the spray cans that you can hold them upside down and spray them just a little bit, and that kind of cleans the tube out, and it'll make it so that when you use this again, it's not completely clogged, and you probably can get more life out of it. All right, so this is how it turned out. It would be a similar procedure if you wanted to paint it and cover up the wood grain. You would probably just put some primer down, at least 1 coat of primer, and then a few coats of the paint, and then maybe like a clear coat or something like that. But that's the general idea of prepping the bare wood into something more usable and maintainable. All right, so this is how the railing turned out. It's looking pretty good. I still have some baseboard work and some painting to do. But as far as the railing goes, it's definitely looking fairly decent, and it kind of matches the floors a little bit. And also this is the island color with the butcher block. So it kind of ties in to the rest of the house pretty well. So if this video helped you, make sure to smash that like button, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. We'll see you in the next one.